And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Reverend Dr. Pamela Breaux. And I'd like to read just a little of what Susan wrote in our newsletter, the fellowship newsletter, as an introduction. Pam is a mother, a grandmother, a friend, a teacher, and mentor to many people. Her studies have been in drama and theology. She has worked with Native Americans, studied with Thich Nhat Hanh, and explored many modalities. Her parents, Harmon and June Breaux, were involved with Edgar Cayce in the early days and supporting the work of the ARE. Pam was a popular speaker for the Association for Research and Enlightenment for over 40 years, both nationally and locally. Pam and I have connected in past years through music, through our love of music. And she has been serving this community and has blessed our church many times with her music and her words of wisdom. Reverend Breaux speaks from her heart. So let us give her a warm fellowship welcome.
Oh, that's something, Cheryl. That was powerful. And all of us together creating this field, this unified field of love. I want to say that one scholar commented that he didn't think that the civil rights movement would even have gotten off the ground if it hadn't been for the singing, and that music was what galvanized us. And that's what we don't have now. We have globally in different spots, but it was something I want to lift up to you, the power of music to unify and to inspire. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other angels I have encountered. Well, I'd be here all day if I was to speak about a lot of this, but I felt as I prayed about this being the anniversary of Dr. King's, that I wanted to, that the Spirit was calling me to preach on this. Without a vision, people perish. Without a vision, people perish, die, wither away. That's from Proverbs 20:19. So we need a vision, individually and as a group. And as you know, I love story. I have a master's in theater, and which I got in West Berlin when it was a West Berlin, with the rock wall built there to keep us from the East, and vice versa. So the power of story has grown on me and grown on me. And after being a pastor for 35 years, just realizing that Jesus, too, didn't take the path of being an academician. He took the path of being a storyteller, a parable sower, a seed sower. And so that is what I'm going to be sharing with you today. It's just inviting you to listen, explore, imagine a few important events that happened in my life, and I'm sure everyone could testify to something in their lifetime as well that has to do with angels. Now, when I was taking a class at the University of Chicago and getting my doctorate in theology and anthropology, I was studying a whole class on the Kayapó of Brazil, a certain tribe that lives in the jungle there. And as we're watching it, and believe me, I was like twice as old as every student that was in the room. That was very humbling. And I was only 59, but you kind of tend to give up your dreams before then. And I'd given up my Margaret Mead dream quite a few years, but the Lord said, "No, you're going to get that dream fulfilled." And so we were watching as the video was being taken of these Kayapó people dancing together. And it hit me. They're all decorated, and they have guinea feathers and chicken feathers and all kinds of feathers on. And I saw that really is kind of strange. And then as I sat there pondering and watching, I went, oh my gosh, what's the main thing in our angelology is that angels have wings like birds, just like these other tribes. So that was really cool. So I'm no authority on angels for sure, but I have a few things that I want to share with you before I get into Dr. King. I think we all have our own ideas of what are qualities of angels, even if angels exist. Maybe there's some people here this morning who don't believe that yet. And yet, hopefully, after this sermon, you might start looking for being open to help from angels. So one of the biggest things angels can do is help, but they can't help without us and our free will inviting them to help us. So that is really important. They honor our free will. Also, we know that angel stands for a messenger from God, so we often get messages from God through angels, at least biblically. I'm talking now the royal we. And we know they're kind and compassionate, and it's humble. It's interesting, when the movement started back in the 70s, I remember at the bookstore at the ARE, I was working as the conference coordinator back then, and I read all the books there were to read, but that was 50 years ago. But I do remember that at one point a woman prayed to an angel when she was being robbed or whatever, and an angel came to her and saved her. And there were a lot of stories like that, but one, she was then being raped at another time in her life. She called to the angels and no one came to stop her and save her. So I went, darn, there's just no absolutes. But anyway, this morning I would like to look at both, I would like to tell you a story of a couple of angel adventures and move then into Dr. King. I was in, we had our family, our little family with two little girls, 5-year-old and 10-year-old, had moved to Chicago so that I could get my doctorate there. Every day I had to drive down from the north side of Chicago down to the south side where my school was. And the Dan Ryan was the expressway, if you've ever been in Chicago. And very, very busy highway, and trucks going way over the speed limit, Mack trucks. And so I was driving along with the kids there, and we were singing songs and having a good time. And all of a sudden, I realized it was hard to turn my power steering. And then I realized that the brakes were really, really hard to put on. And then I realized, oh my God, we're out of gas. And here we are, trucks zooming by. And I tried not to panic, and somehow I pulled enough of the car over that it careened off where there wasn't even a shoulder, but there was a tiny little place there at the side of the road. And the girls started crying. I said, get down, because it was very possible that we were going to get hit by one of these Mack trucks going so quickly. And this van stopped on the side of the road. And as we're crying, and I'm praying to anybody and anything, I see a car, kind of a truck, small truck, come up from behind us. A woman comes up to me and tells me to roll down the window, and we're all crying by now. But this woman says, don't worry, we're going to help you. And the truck said something like Chicago Highway Aid. So she said, don't worry, if somebody gets hit, it's going to be us first, because they were parked behind us. And that touched my heart so much. So she said, don't worry, I'm calling in. We're going to get gas brought to you. You're going to be just fine. And so I'm trying to calm my kids down, looking for the gas truck to come and get there. And it did pretty quickly. And then I turned around to say thank you to this woman and her crew. She was just wearing a green old jacket, a utility jacket, and she was gone. The truck was gone, but I remembered the name, so I said to the man who brought the gas, could you tell me where I could write the Chicago Highway Patrol, because I'd like to thank them for saving our lives, basically. And the man looked at me and said, ma'am, we don't have a Chicago Highway Patrol. And I said, what? So that's one of my stories this morning. It's interesting that the two stories that have come up to me have to do with cars. Maybe because I'm thinking of moving soon. I don't know. Maybe because we're always moving. Change is always happening. But those could have been angelic and angels. Definitely spirit and powers of moving, going, coming quickly, and it's really an amazing story. So much compassion in this woman. I was surprised a woman even came up to the door of my car. The other one was when my dad was dying, and he was in a coma for 10 days up in Cape Cod, and I stayed as long as I could up there with my sisters and my mom, but I was just starting a new job, and he was gonna fire me if I didn't come back to work. So I flew back into Chicago's O'Hare. How many have been to O'Hare? You know what O'Hare is like, right? And this was, again, like almost 30 years ago. And my kids came running in to find me at the baggage claim. But then John comes running in to find the kids. And we all got together and we walked outside to get in the car. I was so glad to be home. And the car had been towed away. Now, in O'Hare, even 30 years ago, if that car is towed away, it's towed away like 50,000 miles from where O'Hare is. I mean, it is so far. You get on a bus and a special bus for the parking lot, and then you go for miles and miles and miles. It's in the middle of the day, and we get there, and this man's behind the little wires of his window, and we said, we'd like to get the car back. Here's my credit card. And he goes, I'm sorry, ma'am, we only take cash. And I said, oh my God, John, do you have cash? No. Do you have cash, Pam? No. Well, how are we gonna get our car back? And the man said, that's your problem, lady. And so here I was, coming from a dying father in a coma. I had two little kids to protect, and there was my husband, and I just sat down on the ground. There was nobody in sight. It was like a desert. It was so weird. And I just sat on the ground and started crying. I didn't know what else to do. I just didn't know what to do. And a man comes walking out of nowhere, because there was nowhere to walk out from except a flat piece of ground. And he said, I told him the story. He said, ma'am, I have $200 I'd like to loan you. And I thought, oh my goodness, this can't be true. But it was true. He had an address, and I mailed him back the money eventually. So there's different grades, I think, and different kinds, different jobs for angels. But they will come if you, I would think. I mean, it's worth a try, is basically what my theory is. Ask for the help, no matter what the result. Now, the rest of this I want to dedicate to Dr. King. When I was 19, I was on break. It was in August of 1966. And I don't know how I got the courage or the calling or whatever to drive from a southern suburb down to Chicago to the worst drug-infested gang rapes, everything, to march with Dr. King for better housing. This was not for race per se, except for better housing. It was the worst in Cabrini Green there. And I was about as far as I am from Udale, as we're all making the lines with our arms crossed, and we're singing the songs. I looked it up, and there had been a 50-year anniversary of this event happening. I want to be sure it really happened. Of course, social media doesn't prove that, but there were about 700 people there. And the streets were lined with mostly young men, and they were yelling out terrible names to all of us. I never felt such hatred in my life as these young men yelling out these names to us and to Dr. King. All of a sudden, a can with a jagged edge, tin can of food, you had food in it, hit Dr. King and blood started coming down his cheek. And then someone else threw a stone and it brought him to his knees. And the police come running up and say, should we arrest him? Should we arrest him, Dr. King? What should we do? And he said, as we all held our breath as one entity, no, in that beautiful, deep voice of his, I'll never forget it. We have come here to march for better housing for our brothers and sisters, and we're going to keep marching for that goal. And we all began our march again. And that began the whole trajectory of my life in social justice, that incident. Within a year and a half, Dr. King was dead. He had been assassinated. But I had that glimpse. Now, that last night of his life, he was in Memphis. You might remember this. Some of you, if this were a young congregation, people would be going, what is she doing telling us these old stories? It's because if we don't have a vision, the people perish. And this is one of the best visionaries that I've ever known, not known personally, but been able to get to be in his aura and his energy. And so the Bible reading the night, he was in Memphis, Tennessee, and the sanitation workers were striking. And people were, of course, they're all black at that time. And this was April 4th, 1968. So he starts with a sermon about the Good Samaritan. I'm not going to repeat that to you. You all know the story of the Good Samaritan, except that you were probably like me. As you grew up, you thought, what a good story about a nice man who risked his life, gave money for the stranger, helped him. That's not the only thing. Jesus knew that the Samaritans were enemies of the Jews. They were both Semitic, but the Samaritans lived in the mountains, not in Jerusalem, where the other Jews lived. The Jews in Jerusalem thought that the language, the accents were bad. The Samaritans worshipped on the mountain, not the temple. They had dark skin, darker than the other Jews. They were looked down upon and seen as enemies, certainly not friends of the Samaritans. So what's hidden in this message that I want to share with you is that even our enemies, or especially our enemies, can help us. Now, this is King's take for the rest of this. I want to just share with you these words. And I wish I had his voice, but then again, God told me, listen, you got to use the voice you got, I gave you, and King had his king voice. You're never going to have that this lifetime. So you'll have to listen to the ideas. Now, he continues here as he's speaking to this huge group of sanitation workers and their families. We use our imagination a great deal to try to determine why the priest and the Levite didn't stop to help this man who had been robbed on the road to Jericho. At times we say they were busy going to a church meeting, and that's why they couldn't stop and help him. They had to get to Jerusalem, so they wouldn't be late for their meeting. At other times, we think that there was a religious law, and there was for the Jews, that you can't touch a person who's dying or it makes you unclean. You have to go do certain penance or whatever. So maybe that was the reason they didn't stop. Every now and then we begin to wonder whether maybe they were not going down to Jerusalem or Jericho, to organize a Jericho Road Improvement Association. By now the crowd is laughing. He has them in the palm of his hand. That's a possibility. Maybe they felt it was better to deal with a problem than help an individual. But I'm going to tell you what my imagination tells me. It's possible that those men were afraid. You see, the Jericho Road is a dangerous road. I remember when Mrs. King and I were first in Jerusalem, and we rented a car and drove from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And I said to my wife, I can see why Jesus used this as a setting for his parable. It's a winding road, really conducive to ambushing. You start out in Jericho up some 200 feet above sea level, and you end up in like 20 minutes, 200 feet below sea level. The Jews called us the Bloody Pass. And it's possible, King goes on, it's possible that the priest and Levite looked over that man on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible they felt the man on the ground was merely faking. I had never thought of these in my 36 years as a minister. What reasons, besides the obvious one, they were just selfish, self-absorbed, whatever, and their faith was fake. But anyway, maybe they were afraid that this guy, as soon as they went to help him, the other robbers would jump on them and seize them and their stuff. And so the first question that the priest asked, the first question Levite asked was to themselves, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But the Good Samaritan came by. There wasn't the scholarship out that we have now about that. And he reversed the question. If I don't stop to help this man, what's going to happen to him? If I don't stop to help this man, what's going to happen to him? That's the question. And people are applauding by now. They're applauding. So let us rise up tonight. And he could say this tonight, today, this morning here. Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. Let us move on in these powerful days of challenge to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. And I want to thank God once more for allowing me to be here with you. Several years ago, and he tells about how he was autographing his book, and he wasn't looking up at all, and he heard a woman's voice behind him say, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And he goes, "Yes." And the next thing he knows, the woman's stabbing him in his chest. Did you ever hear that story? I never heard that story 50 years ago. But some of you did, apparently. And so they rushed him to the hospital. And basically, he almost died because that knife, if it had punctured the aorta, it would have killed him. You drown in your own blood if you're in that situation. But I love this that King said. The doctors were great. They cut his chest open, and they saved it, got the knife out, all this. And then he said he was finally allowed to read the letter from the president to him. The vice president wrote him. He said, "I don't care about them. There's only one letter I care about that I got during that period." You know who it was from? It was from a 9th grade white girl. And it went like this. Dear Dr. King, I'm a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School. While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a white girl. I read in the paper of your misfortune, of your suffering, and I read that if you had sneezed, that's what the New York Times said, you would have died. And I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze. And so tonight, he says, applause is happening. I want to say tonight that I too am happy that I didn't sneeze. Because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1960 when students, young people, all which they're doing today as well, different actions of justice. When students all over the South began sitting at the lunch counters. And I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream and taking the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy, which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1961 when we started taking our freedom rides and ended segregation in interstate travel. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 62 when Negroes in Albany, Georgia decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they are going somewhere because a man can't ride your back unless it's bent. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been here in 1963 when the black people of Birmingham, Alabama aroused the conscience of the nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have had a chance later that year in August to try to tell America about a dream that I had had. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been down in Selma to see the great movement there. And if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been in Memphis to see a community rally around these brothers and sisters who are suffering. Oh, I'm so happy that I didn't sneeze. Well, then he goes on for the famous part that you probably all remember, even younger people, and that is his mountaintop speech. It's just a very short paragraph here. Well, I don't know what will happen now. It's really prophetic, as we know, in hindsight. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. That's what an angel does. I'm adding that. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountaintop. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people, and I know that he would include all people now, not just black people, but people of all colors. That we, as a family, probably he'd say with the beloved community that he so resonated with, as a people, we will get to the promised land. And so I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. So in closing, what I want us to do, just real quick, stand up and get close to your neighbors. And I want you, first of all, just to hold hands like we usually do, like this. Just hold hands there. Now that's nice. It's comfy, it's warm, right? Kind of, I'm cold. But we're connected, and that's good. And it's a good white thing that we do, right? We're at least holding hands. Okay, now let go, and I want you to cross over and move in and hold the hand of the people next to you. That's it. Come on, tighten up. Show me we can still do it. Yeah. So now you got to face forward. We walked in lines, David. It's okay. We walked in lines behind him. Can you feel the difference? Yes. So much more strength, right? It's not just about blocking the hatred and the everything. It's about uniting in strength. And Spirit just gave me this for us to all feel what it's like to have walked with Dr. King, or maybe we went to a different march, never got to walk with him, but there were so many marches against the war, whatever march. But there is strength in this, and if you ever get a chance, pass it on to our children, that there is a way to walk with dignity and respect and nonviolence, but love that we've heard talked about today. And so I close then by saying, to remember, without a vision, people perish. So what's your vision? Got to still keep having our visions, finding new ones, inventing new ones, living old ones, bringing them to life again. And thank you, Dr. King, my angel, my black angel, my dark angel, my angel of light, human or spirit, both, like we all are. Thank you for your angelic language, your deep, resonant voice, your passions, your actions, marching and singing, your vision which we still need so badly 50-some years later. We could still say, though, that in this group of faith, glory, hallelujah, mine eyes have seen, mine eyes will see the coming of the Lord. Amen. 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 Thank you, thank you.